Hello and welcome to a presentation about registration with the General Teaching Council for Scotland. In early 2022, we consulted on proposals to update our current registration and standards rules 2015. We received 256 responses to our consultation, which provided valuable insight into the views of our partners, as well as demonstrating some common misunderstandings about our role, remit and current registration rules and criteria. Following the consultation process, our Council took the decision to take some more time to engage with our partners and to educate about our role and remit, with the aim of addressing some of the misunderstandings that have arisen, as well as addressing some common queries and providing further clarity, including the meaning and impact of registration. The General Teaching Council for Scotland, or GTC Scotland, has a unique role in Scottish education. We are the teaching profession's independent registration and regulation body, and we were established to ensure standards for the teaching profession in Scotland. We work to maintain and enhance trust in teaching, and this is a complex space as we work to advance standards as well as ensure that they are maintained. Our role is to register and regulate teachers and college lecturers, and we do this by keeping a public register and setting and upholding the standards for entering and remaining in the teaching profession. Our role is set out in law. To gain registration with us, an individual must meet the relevant standard for registration. Our regulation function ensures that these standards are upheld by our registrants. We can regulate both the conduct and competence of registered teachers. Regulation is an essential part of GTC Scotland registration. It's essential for public protection, specifically child safeguarding, and for upholding standards in the teaching profession. It ensures that only those who should belong to our profession remain in it. It goes to the heart of what we are and what we have been established to do. Registration and regulation are therefore inextricably linked. Regulation begins the moment someone seeks registration with us. We ensure standards are maintained by asking teachers and college lecturers to confirm their commitment to learning and the principle that standards are improved by encouraging ongoing learning. We also investigate serious concerns about teachers and college lecturers. We know doing this contributes to improving the quality of learning and teaching and helps protect the public. Registering and regulating the teaching profession gives us a unique insight, which in turn allows us to advise the education system on key issues we see arising. We use our voice to speak up for high professional standards. In terms of our structure at GTC Scotland, we're governed by our council of 37 members, which is reflective of the breadth of the education system in Scotland. We're independent from government and receive no funding for our core roles of registration and regulation. This work is funded by the fees teachers and college lecturers pay. Currently, there are over 81,500 registrants on the Register of Teachers. GTC Scotland was established in 1965 after teachers themselves raised concerns about the increasing number of uncertified or unqualified teachers in Scotland's schools. There was a strong view that establishing GTC Scotland was an important factor in enhancing the public status of the teaching profession by giving the teaching profession itself responsibility for its own standards. We were created following calls from teachers for a body to ensure teaching standards. Qualification was and continues to be a critical part of registration. In 2011, GTC Scotland was made independent. This means we were no longer to be a non-departmental advisory public body associated with the Scottish Government. We became the world's first independent registration and regulatory body for teaching. Our new independent status was introduced through the Public Services Reform General Teaching Council for Scotland Order 2011. This took effect in April 2011 and remains in place today. The 2011 order sets out our role and our functions, and these include keeping the Register of Teachers, establishing professional standards, and investigating fitness to teach of those seeking to be or who are already registered with us. We also have a role in making recommendations to Scottish ministers on matters such as teachers' education, training, career development and fitness to teach. Our principal aims as an organisation are to maintain and improve professional standards and contribute to improving the quality of learning and teaching. Our functions, which stem from the 2011 Order, result in founding principles for us, as set out in our associated principles paper and on the screen now. These are elements of GTC Scotland's role and remit that are fundamental to what we do. For example, a teaching qualification is the foundation of registration with us. As mentioned earlier, we were created following calls from teachers for a body to ensure teaching standards, and qualification was and continues to be a critical part of that registration. We hold a qualifications-based register. In Scotland, teaching in a school or a college is a profession, and registration with us is about meeting professional standards. High standards help instill trust in the profession and advance the status of the teaching profession. GTC Scotland itself doesn't impose the requirement to register with us. That comes from other pieces of law in Scotland. For local authority school teachers in Scotland, it comes from a piece of law called the Requirements for Teachers Scotland Regulations 2005, and in particular Regulation 4 of that piece of law, which says in shortened terms that every education authority shall employ only a registered teacher as a teacher. It defines a registered teacher as a teacher whose particulars are recorded in the register maintained by the General Teaching Council for Scotland. For independent school teachers, the requirement to register with us comes from the Registration of Independent Schools Prescribed Persons Scotland Regulations 2017. And this piece of law was introduced to require that from 2017, all teachers employed in independent schools in Scotland required to be registered with us. And they included transitional arrangements to allow for any teacher employed prior to the 1st of October 2017 who wasn't GCCS registered to do so by the 1st of June 2021, a timeline that was extended from October 2020 due to the coronavirus pandemic. For college lecturers in Scotland's colleges, the requirement to register does not come from a piece of law like it does with school teachers, but instead it is a requirement within a college lecturer's employment terms and conditions, which was introduced in 2018. In summary, it's not GTC Scotland that imposes a requirement on certain groups or sectors to register with us, but instead it is through the mandatory legal requirements imposed elsewhere that result in the requirement to register with us. We only register those where there is a mandatory requirement to register. For all those who are required to register with us, they are required to register on our Register of Teachers. We hold only one register, and that's the Register of Teachers. That's the register that is set out in detail in our governing legislation, the 2011 Order, and it's the register that we can regulate. For additional clarity, while there is reference in the 2011 Order to us being able to keep other registers of other individuals working in educational settings as we think fit, we would be unable to regulate any additional register. This is due to the way in which the 2011 Order is written and means that any additional register does not fall under the same requirements as the Register of Teachers, including regulation. If we were to regulate an additional register, we would be acting beyond the remit of the 2011 Order. It's important to highlight the impact of this. To create a register that could not be regulated would have serious public protection risks, and it's not a step that we can take. That is the reason why, under the 2011 Order, we will only hold the one register that we can regulate, and that's the Register of Teachers. Anyone entering the GTC Scotland Register of Teachers is doing so as a teacher. So while distinct in their skills and qualifications, our college lecturer registrants enter the Register of Teachers as teachers of further education. This aligns with the terms of our governing legislation, which we are bound by until such time as it may be updated. This then leads us to the question, what is a teacher? There is no legal statement defining what a teacher is. It's not set down in one piece of law. The term teacher is not a protected title like it is in other professions, like chemists, dentists or solicitors. We can take a definition of a teacher from law, however, through what it means to be a teacher and what the different laws say about this. The Requirement of Teachers Scotland Regulations 2005 set out the requirement for anyone employed as a teacher to be a registered teacher and what that means. This is mirrored in the independent sector through the 2017 law. Our governing legislation requires us to set the criteria for entry to the Register of Teachers, requiring that an individual may be registered only if they have obtained a recognised teaching qualification or we are otherwise satisfied that their education, training or experience warrants their registration. In relation to the second part of these requirements, this is what we refer to as equivalency. An essential part of our registration criteria is what is considered to be equivalent to a recognised teaching qualification for those who may not have this because they did not qualify as a teacher in Scotland. Our registration rules set out the equivalency test, which ensures that we register only those who are suitably qualified to an equivalent level, no matter where they qualified. So, for GTC Scotland, a teacher is someone who has a recognised teaching qualification or equivalent in terms of the Registration and Standards Rules 2015 and is registered with us on the Register of Teachers. Together, this requires an individual to have achieved the relevant qualification and have met the professional standard in order to achieve registration, in turn making them eligible to be employed as a teacher in Scotland's schools. There are, of course, many professionals who currently work in our schools who would not fall under this definition. These colleagues do vital work in education, though they will not fall under what it means to be a teacher and therefore will not be registered with us. GTC Scotland, as the Teaching Council, registers those who fall under the definition of a teacher that I have set out. As a result, a teaching qualification underpins what it means to be a teacher and is the foundation for entry onto the Register of Teachers. That is set out in our governing legislation. In addition to this, and as I've mentioned earlier, a teaching qualification is the underpinning principle on which we were originally formed in 1965. A teaching qualification is an enduring, essential element of what it means to be a teacher in Scotland. This is a principle that will continue for GTC Scotland and is considered a non-negotiable aspect of registration and what it means to be a teacher. I'll move on now to where we are in terms of registration criteria to provide some additional clarity around the current registration and standards rules and how they impact our teaching profession, both those who are currently registered with us and those who are seeking registration. We're required to make and publish rules setting out the procedure for inclusion in the Register of Teachers, registration criteria, and otherwise governing the operation of the register. These are our Registration and Standard Rules 2015. These rules are the go-to for setting out the operation and management of the register. They set out, among other things, our registration criteria, how the register is arranged, requirements placed on teachers to maintain their registration, including payment of fees and the process we use as our re-accreditation scheme, which we call Professional Update, as well as the reasons why a registered teacher is removed from the register. Over the time our rules have been in place, there have been changes to Scottish education, teaching and GTC Scotland's own policy context. For example, over that time we've seen the introduction of mandatory registration for teachers in the independent school sector and college lecturers, as well as a new requirement for head teachers in local authority and grant-aided schools to be awarded the professional standard for headship. Brexit has also taken place, meaning the legal framework in relation to the recognition of professional qualifications between European member states is no longer in place. I'm now going to share some information about how our register is organised. There are 4 categories of registration: primary, secondary subject, additional support needs and further education. I'm going to pick out some comments that we received during our consultation to provide a bit more clarity. We received some queries relating to the language we use. For example, the use of further education teachers rather than college lecturers. The 2011 order sets out the language that we use, including the use of teachers of further education. We also received some comments related to the need to retain the current instructor category. Our categories of registration are the ones that I have outlined. There is no instructor category of registration. We also received some comments through the consultation about the retention of the named school only category. The named school only category was created as a closed transitional category introduced to ensure that those teachers employed in an independent school at the introduction of mandatory GTC Scotland registration could be registered. It's important to note that when categories change following any future refresh of our rules, we would continue to honour previous registration categories for those already registered in them. However, new registrants wouldn't be able to be registered in any historic category. Our registration rules set out the registration criteria for those seeking entry to our Register of Teachers, and that includes those who have qualified inside Scotland and outside Scotland. Schedule 2 of our registration rules detail the requirements for those who have qualified outside Scotland, including equivalency requirements for qualifications. This ensures parity across the register and that those who qualified outside Scotland can access the Register of Teachers if their qualifications are equivalent to that of those who have qualified inside Scotland. Our registration criteria is and must be based upon our founding principles. This includes the essential element of registration, which is to have a teaching qualification. We received some comments through our consultation process suggesting that we were prioritising categories of registration rather than skills, and that further consideration should be given to people entering through non-traditional routes or with other degrees. But the fundamental requirement of a teaching qualification remains. Equivalency in qualification for those qualified outside of Scotland ensures that other qualifications achieved by individuals can enable access to the Register of Teachers. And without any equivalent qualification, registration criteria will not be met. An individual who is employed as a teacher must be employed in a role that aligns with their registration category. This is something that was clarified by the Court of Session in 2020. It confirmed that it was not simply a case that having registration on the GTC Scotland Register of Teachers was sufficient, that the registration categories mattered. To borrow from the Court of Session's opinion, GTC Scotland is the keeper and administrator of a register aimed at identifying when someone has passed the necessary steps for qualification in a particular sphere of teaching, all with a view to maintaining teaching standards in schools. It went on to highlight that, given the reasons for its existence and the functions of the GTCS, plus the elaborate regimes set up under the 1965 Act and now the 2011 Order, it would be something of a surprise if an education authority was not constrained by any of this, with the only restriction being that an applicant's name had to appear somewhere on the register. The requirement to employ a registered teacher whose particulars are recorded in the register imports a need to employ teachers only in accordance with the particulars of their registration. GTC Scotland is not, however, directly involved in the employment of teachers. The requirements placed upon employers of teachers are just that, an obligation placed on the employer. It's therefore the responsibility of the employer to ensure that they are employing teachers in a role that they are both appropriately registered for and in turn appropriately skilled and qualified to teach. This is an area of our current framework that we are keen to learn more about from our partners who have direct experience of how things work in practice. As well as registration categories, we have registration statuses. These are provisional registration, provisional conditional registration, full registration general, and full registration associate. Where someone meets the standard for provisional registration, but does not yet meet certain aspects of the requirements for full registration, for instance, they've not completed a period of teaching service, often referred to as probation, they will receive provisional registration, and this remains in place until they meet the requirements for full registration under our rules. An individual may meet the standard for provisional registration, but not yet entirely meet the academic requirements, in which case we may award the provisional conditional registration. This places a condition on a registrant's registration, for instance, to complete additional academic courses to meet the shortfall, and these are required to be completed within a set period of time. In the same way as provisional registration, this remains until the individual satisfies their condition or the time limit expires. Full registration is awarded where an individual meets the requirements for full registration with the rules. Where an individual has full registration but may not be teaching for a period, they may apply for associate status. Associate status could be appropriate for those who wish to remain on our register and have retired from education and will not engage in any further teaching, or are not currently working in an educational frontline context, or who are working out with Scotland with no intention of returning in the foreseeable future. Teachers with associate status are not required to complete the 5-yearly sign-off process for professional update. Key to registration is our professional standards. To gain registration with us, an individual must meet GTC Scotland's standard for provisional registration or standard for full registration. Setting the professional standards of teachers is a key element of GTC Scotland's role and remit. We have a general function to establish and to review and change as necessary the standards of education and training appropriate to school teachers and the standards of conduct and professional competence expected of a registered teacher. These include our benchmark standards required of all those who are registered or seeking to be registered with us. These are the standard for provisional registration and the standard for full registration. The standard for provisional registration is the benchmark of competence required of all student teachers at the end of initial teacher education who are seeking provisional registration with us. This professional standard outlines what is required to become a teacher in Scotland. The standard for full registration is the foundation of the professional standards and is the benchmark of competence required of all registered teachers in Scotland. This professional standard is the gateway to the profession and constitutes the teaching standards in which learners, parents, the profession itself and the wider community can have confidence. This professional standard encompasses what it is to be a teacher in Scotland. Beyond these mandatory standards, we have aspirational and developmental professional standards. These are the standard for career-long professional learning and the standard for middle leadership, as well as the standard for headship. The standard for headship has the additional purpose of being a requirement for teachers permanently employed in local authority and grant-aided school head teacher roles. The professional standards for college lecturers have been transferred to GTC Scotland from the Scottish Government for GTC Scotland to set. Regulation starts with registration, which involves the consideration of someone's suitability to enter the register of teachers, both in terms of their fitness to teach and their qualifications and experience. GTC Scotland regulates the individual teacher. It doesn't regulate the system. GTC Scotland's relationship is directly with the teacher as their registration and regulation body. Our role is not to hold employers or other parts of the education system accountable for their actions, for example, in relation to their employment practices. Registration and regulation are inextricably linked. Regulation is not optional for individuals who are seeking to be or who are registered on the Register of Teachers. And similarly, regulation is not an optional function for GTC Scotland. Regulation is an essential part of registration. essential for public protection, specifically child safeguarding, and upholding standards within the teaching profession. It ensures that only those who belong to the profession remain in it, and goes to the heart of what GTC Scotland is and has been established to do. The 2011 order sets out that GTC Scotland must investigate the fitness to teach of any individual seeking registration, and may investigate any registered teacher's fitness to teach where it becomes aware of circumstances which it considers justify such an investigation. We must refuse to register or remove from the register any individual seeking or holding registration where we consider them to be unfit to teach. We regulate both the conduct and competence of registered teachers. So registration is the first part of our regulatory function. Whether individuals are qualified inside Scotland or outside Scotland, this process includes review of applications, determining that an individual is considered to meet the relevant standard for registration, and reviewing all application declarations in relation to their character and conduct, which includes Disclosure Scotland scheme checks. Registration and the management of our register of teachers needs to work for the whole education system. The Registration and Standards Rules 2015 provide the framework for the operation of the one regulated register that we hold, the Register of Teachers. Any future change to our registration and standards rules, which may on the face of it affect only one part of the Register of Teachers, has implications for the rest of the register. We need to be alert to these potential implications when considering any change, particularly in considering any legal risk or challenge that might arise. This aspect of our registration criteria can be challenging, particularly for some of our key partners. We must, however, ensure that whatever registration criteria we put in place are founded in fairness and within the principle of ensuring integrity across our register. This presentation aims to provide clear information about our core function of registration and invite you to engage with us to better understand how the current registration framework works in your own context. There's an opportunity to meet together to discuss registration with the aim of better understanding views as well as learning more about unique contexts and any challenges faced. Following on from these sessions, we will enter phase 2 of our education and engagement programme, and as well as continuing to work with our partners, we'll also engage directly with the teaching profession to gather key feedback from those who are most directly affected by our registration rules. We will continue to provide updates on the progress of our work. In the meantime, thank you for listening to this presentation, and I hope that you have found it helpful and informative. Thank you.